IMP software. We provide forecasting, budgeting, planning, reporting software to multi-academy trusts, and we spend all day, every day working with trusts, and so we're quite conscious of the challenges that a lot of trusts are going through, and they're very similar, and there are no right or wrong answers. So what we wanted to do in this series was focus on the stories of MAT leaders from across the sector in lots of different trusts, just to understand the journey that they're on in their trust, what they've struggled with, the challenges they're having, what they've done, the successes, just to share as many perspectives as we can to help other CFOs, COOs, heads of finance that are going through similar stories. So today we are very kindly joined by Charity Main, who is CFO at Anglian Learning. So thank you very much, Charity, for agreeing to take part in this. I guess we'll start off with, how did you get into the wonderful world of MAT finance and end up as CFO at Anglian?
So I suppose I came from a I didn't come a very traditional route. So I know a lot of CFOs kind of have come up, perhaps through school business manager and those sorts of roles. But I had no experience in finance whatsoever when I joined Anglian Learning. So I have predominantly a local authority, local government background. So I had worked in local government for 14 years prior to joining Anglian Learning. But again, that wasn't in an education authority. In fact, that was just in a district council, and was really just ready for my next role. Sort of had been really since I'd started in local government, but actually even before that, had decided that kind of working in the public sector was where my interest was. I don't particularly have an interest sort of in the overtly commercial world. I never really saw myself as a kind of accountant in manufacturing, and had really enjoyed sort of being involved in projects sort of rooted in communities, and sort of making a difference.
So not a traditional finance background. So where does your finance knowledge and expertise come from? Just because you've given us loads of grief over the last 8 months around exactly what you want to get out of the software. So where's that knowledge? Because I had no idea. I thought, you must have come traditional route through finance as a graduate or whatever else. So how have you accumulated that knowledge and strong desire of where you want to get to with the finance at Anglian?
I think a lot of that comes from the fact that actually the challenges are the same everywhere. So the challenges in local government were exactly the same as the challenges that we experience as a multi-academy trust, in terms of what should our reporting look like. And I'd been involved in actually quite a big project across 3 district councils in Cambridgeshire, who all got rid of very aged finance systems and replaced them with a new finance system. And I was heavily involved actually in project managing that and driving the reporting for that and the budgeting for that and so on. Right. So actually I think it's
picked it up.
The same everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's clearly a lot of experience there. In terms of Anglian, could you just introduce Anglian in terms of what the trust looks like, and how long you've been in post there, and how that position and trust has changed in that time?
Okay. So I joined 2 years ago. So I joined in January 2019. And the trust has actually grown significantly. We've basically doubled in size during that period. So when I joined, we were 4 secondaries and 3 primary schools. We are now 6 secondaries and 7 primary schools. We will be 8 primary schools on the 1st of April, and we also have a free school that is now has DfE consent to be constructed, and should open in September 2022. So we have grown very significantly. We took 5 schools who transferred from another trust on the 1st of April during lockdown. So quite a sort of significant change in the size of the trust.
And how has finance had to change? So from describe it how it was in January 19 to where it is now. What's that kind of journey been like, and where have you come from, and where are you now, and also where do you see that going into the future?
So when I joined, centrally there were just 2 people in the central team, me and one other accountant. Finance generally finance generally devolved. So in a secondary school, a finance manager and a finance assistant. In a primary school, somebody doing finance, but alongside, you know, lots of other things. But basically, all the transaction processing devolved. So how a finance system that was perfectly functional, but was very silo based. So it had been set up effectively as a separate database for each school. So any consolidation that we wanted to do, we had to do manually.
Yeah.
We couldn't, if somebody said to you, how much is electricity across the trust, we'd have to run a report 8 times and then, or 7 times, and then add it up.
And was electricity called the same thing in all of those schools?
So yes, actually, that piece of work had been done. Okay. So there was quite a significant piece of work that had been done around chart of accounts, in terms of them being on a common chart of accounts. So it wasn't, you know, we could report consistently. It was just, it was very time consuming. And at month end, we had to do, you know, we had to close 8 purchase ledgers, 8 purchase ledgers, because we had to close the central trust purchase ledger as well. So it was kind of those sorts of things.
Where it was 8 separate silos, and if someone wanted to add a new code for toilet rolls, I mean, did those sort of things, how were you able to control the kind of structure and outline of those systems?
Yeah, we were able to. So although they were siloed databases, they were in a kind of common system.
Okay.
So we were able to control who was able to do what effectively. So actually to lock down quite a lot of that.
That was 2 years ago, fairly traditional, light central team, very school-led, both systems and functions. That's quite different from today. So how did you go about that, going from, right, we've got some challenges here, and consolidation is the obvious one, but I guess there was other byproducts of that setup. How did you go about at that point, thinking, right, we're doubling in size over the next 2 years, we've got this position? How did you then map out what that journey is going to look like, and what was kind of the running order of that?
Yeah, so what I'd say is that we're not there, you know, and what I would say to anybody is, you've just got to bite it off in chunks that you can do it in, and don't expect to be able to do it all overnight, because you can't. There's just too much happening.
Is that the people, or the technology, or all of it together?
All of it together. It's the people, the technology, it's the fact that, and there's all sorts of things that have gone on in this trust in terms of significant capital projects and other things, and it's just other things will get in the way, and you just need to be realistic about what's achievable while still trying to push things forward. So what we decided to do was, so it became very clear that it wouldn't be sustainable. So we had one secondary school join us on the 1st of January 2020. And really, as part of that, we said, even for 8 schools and a central trust, this isn't sustainable. We need to make a change. So we decided we did a scan of the market in terms of our sort of core financial system, and went for actually the same. So we use Sage, but we actually went for a different version of Sage that allowed us to have a consolidated single database. We got project resourcing to support that implementation. So we recognised that it was going to be difficult to do.
Was that mid-year? That was a mid-year switch, so you didn't go for 1st of September? Yep.
No, I've actually done a number of finance system switches, and actually sometimes not going at the start of the year is easier, because you don't have the whole pressure of I'm trying to do year end and cope with this.
And also, you only get one shot at a 1st of September. If you're 1st of January, actually it can be 1st of February or even 1st of March. So it doesn't matter. You think, okay, we've not done what we should have done. Let's just do it next month or the month after. It just gives you that breathing space to make sure it's right, because you haven't got that fixed point, isn't it?
Yeah. So we went. So we got project resourcing. Went for a single database product. And that's given us a number of advantages. We now have a single purchase ledger. So schools actually still run their own purchase runs at the moment, and we might choose to look at that in the future. But it's things like we've only got suppliers set up once.
Yeah.
And therefore we have better control over things like changes in bank accounts and all that stuff that otherwise, is a little bit of a concern. So it enabled us to do that, and just to really sort of, and it means we only have to close things once. We do purchase ledger, control account reconciliation, sales ledger, control account reconciliations once.
Yeah.
VAT reconciliation. So we have one VAT reconciliation and submission now, not having to do something lots of times and consolidate it together. We still do have balance sheet accounts for schools, but they tend to be their prepayments and their accruals and their payroll control and things, and that's just because of, again, how our relationship works with our payroll advisor. But payroll
for analysis purposes, so you've still got where you've built a process around a control account reconciliation. Actually, let's have those per school. So what does that look like now in terms of today? What financial processing and responsibility sits at the centre versus what's then carried out, maintained, and kind of accountability at school?
Okay, so if I talk a little bit about what the central team looks like now. So the central team has now got 4 people in it. So has me as finance director, 2 trust group accountants, and a trust assistant accountant, as well as some additional sort of part-time resource that's actually sort of with us on a I want to say a casual contract. That's not fair, but it's just just provides some additional resource when we need it, and is a sort of an arrangement that works for that person and works for us. It's somebody who came to the trust years ago and has never been able to escape, basically.
Great. I mean, to have that expertise that you can call upon, I mean, it's a nice thing to have up your sleeve, and if it works both ways, fantastic, because it's really difficult to find people with the expertise that can actually hit the ground running.
So actually much of the transactional processing is still at school level. But as I said, we manage purchase ledger, supplier additions and changes, and although that sort of reconciliation piece is now all done centrally, we and actually have throughout, but we've kind of enhanced what we do in terms of we post centrally all the payroll transactions, just as part of making sure that we've got appropriate linkages and things in terms of a reconciliation. An increasing number of central contracts. So we've just moved to a new photocopying multifunction device contract and things like that. We're starting to say, actually, we don't need an invoice to each school. Can we just have one central invoice and we'll manage the recharges? So sort of more
Can
transactional.
suppliers cope with that? Is that a fundamental requirement from the outset, that they can cope with a different delivery address to invoice? I mean, it's a simple thing, but you know probably how challenging that can be.
I would say that the sector is at the start of that piece of work, and it's some suppliers can cope with it better than others, but where we have been retendering, we've put into the tender, actually this is how it needs to be. And that is one of the things that we need to start to drive. I think it's very easy to look at trust procurement as getting the best value for the contract, which it is, but it's also saying, what about the administration of this contract? If I've got 15 schools, do I really need 15 electricity bills a month? Or actually, could I have one electricity bill a month? Yeah. So I don't think we're there yet, but we're definitely starting.
Just on those, so back to the trust accountants, so there's 2 trust accountants. In terms of the split of roles there, do they have particular schools they look after? Do they have functions that are theirs? How does that work?
So how that works is that generally for a secondary school, secondary schools have finance managers. So we don't do the sort of management accounting piece for a secondary school. So we are there to support, and we will help them with their budget and with their management accounts pack and those sorts of things, but we don't actually prepare those. So yeah, those trust group accountants effectively have between them our primary schools, and they support those primary schools alongside a number of central functions, including maintaining the purchase ledger and the sales ledger, sorting out the VAT, sorting out banking things. So we manage all the banking stuff. Schools still have their own bank accounts, but we manage a lot of the administration of banking and things, all centrally. What I would say is a big change is that as the trust's grown, we get school condition allocation. So quite a significant chunk of capital money. And we started off, so we first got that in 1920. And we started off in the first year saying, all right, well, we're going to distribute that, because the funding comes centrally. We're going to distribute that funding out to schools, and then they can pay all those invoices, and we'll do a bit of a tot up, and then we'll distribute cash around the place. And actually, after the first year, we went, do you know what, this just isn't working. Why don't we administer all of the capital stuff centrally? Because it's, for a lot of schools anyway, it's unusual expenditure, so it always causes a bit of an issue about where it's supposed to be coded. So it's actually, if we control this centrally, because a lot of the operational aspects are controlled centrally, because we've got a director of operations and an estates manager. So we basically do all the processing and managing of school condition allocation expenditure.
How does the allocation, so I guess before it all come to the centre, was it distributed out based on pupil numbers, kind of on the same mechanism, or is there now a needs-based view? Is there a bidding process? How does that whole piece work?
Okay, so there was always, the way that we allocate the funding hasn't actually changed. So what we have is an asset management plan that's prepared for us by our property advisors. So he's an independent objective view, if you like, of the condition of the estate. And then effectively we sit down and look at projects and decide where the greatest need is. And inevitably, school condition allocation is there, predominantly for health and safety things. So it will be things like, this school needs a new heating system because otherwise it's actually at risk of closure. So we will do a do a process to decide where what we're going to spend that school condition allocation on. It was just that then we would estimate, you know, this project we would estimate is going to be, I don't know, £100,000, and then we'd give the school £100,000, and then of course when the bills were all totted up, it wouldn't be £100,000, it would be, well, usually 110,000 inevitably, because builders are involved. And we built contingency in, and all
good builders are available.
And it was just that I suppose the admin was just getting a bit, you know, we're making this more complicated.
It was interesting. I mean, do you think that's been a deliberate thing from the department to move to this? Because it's ultimately Gag Pooling. You know, that mechanism of SCA is Gag Pooling. And you know, in terms of Gag Pooling, is that, you know, Gag Pooling, I think it's got a varied reputation and kind of varied views on that. But ultimately, that process is precisely what Gag Pooling can look like. So if you looked at that and thought, actually, this could really work in other areas of, you know, we're seeing people thinking about IT because of what's gone on over the last 12 months. Can you see that spreading, or what's your views?
Yes, I think we probably can. So we haven't at this stage done any work particularly on Gag Pooling. I think there is naturally some sharing of resource across the trust in various ways anyway. I mean, I suppose at its simplest level, even the flat central charge that we have is a little bit of, I mean, it's not really Gag Pooling, but it's a little bit of sharing resource, because inevitably at the centre, some schools take more of our time than other schools do. So there is a little bit of that goes on already. I think my suspicion is that may well be the direction of travel of the department. As you say, if they're distributing capital money in that way, why would they not distribute other funding in that way? I think, of course, the barriers are all sorts of complicated things around the fact that we still don't have a hard national funding formula, those sorts of things. And I wonder if we manage to get to hard NFF, when that might be the moment that they say, actually, it's going to work on a different basis.
On reserves at the moment, then, you've got schools. How broad are your schools as well? They're relatively geographic, aren't they?
Yeah. So the clue's slightly in the name.
Sorry, well done.
No, it's fine. We don't have any aspirations to be a nationwide trust, and our general sort of rule of thumb is that no school should be more than 60 minutes really from Cambridge, which is sort of the area around which our schools, the majority of our schools are based. So actually the furthest away really that they are is probably 45 minutes from Cambridge at the moment. So the furthest east we go is Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk.
Yep.
And then the furthest west we go is Bassingbourne, which is a village on the border of Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, so you're already across local authorities. So funding then is different, or have they moved to more to the funding formula, or how do you bridge that gap at all at the moment, or are there just differences between the schools?
No, there are just differences between the schools. I mean, actually, for a lot of our secondary schools, they actually reach the minimum per pupil guarantee.
Yeah.
So because we are in a relatively sort of better off area, actually, and Cambridgeshire in particular is historically underfunded. Actually, a lot of our secondaries have found themselves at national minimum per pupil guarantee anyway. So actually, it hasn't made so much of a difference. Primaries are probably where there is a little bit more of a difference. And no, we haven't done anything to sort of formally bridge that gap yet.
I've seen some interesting adoptions of actually where one trust has done it, where they've got schools in different local authorities, and some of those are going to be hit really hard by national funding. So their theory and reason for Gag Pooling was to offer 5 years of relative certain, you can never say never, and especially with everything that's going on, but they were able to say, look, we can almost guarantee your budgets over the next 5 years because we'll work out our own formula with the backdrop of everything else that's going on. So, you know, local governing bodies and schools, just like the certainty, they were fed up with having to every year something changes on funding and they're having to restructure all the time. And that was certainly interesting use of Gag Pooling, which again highlights one phrase which is not particularly well marketed. I think it's running up against a problem with its name, but I think there's some really interesting use cases of it, which is not we're nicking the money from the schools and taking it in the centre. It's just a sensible way of managing budgets and helping that long medium term planning. Yep. So on Gag Pooling, you are not doing it, so you think there's probably you think it's going that way, but no plans afoot.
No, I think it's something that we just sort of keep an eye on in terms of and because the trust has grown so significantly, we kind of need a period of consolidation as well.
So as you've grown quite a lot over the last period, I imagine your top slice has been put through the mill in terms of in that growth period. I mean, I don't know, were the schools converters, were they sponsored, what those schools
no, so actually 6 of the schools that have joined us were just transfers from so an entire trust for 5 of the schools and just a single academy trust for the other. We have the school that is joining us in April is a converter, so we will have some conversion grant associated with that. So yes, I mean, the central charges come under quite significant pressure, but obviously has been able to grow because we've had more schools. So that has certainly helped. But it continues to be a challenge.
What's included within that central charge changed over the kind of 2 years you've now? Has been a deliberate move to think, right, this is what we really need to use this for, or how does that look?
There is a so we still, probably when I joined, we were still a little bit there was still a little bit of a lack of clarity about what happened for certain sorts of system costs, about when they were borne by the school and when they were borne centrally. So one of the things we did is we just said, okay, these systems are all paid for centrally. So things like our finance system and our budgeting system and our compliance, so our sort of estates compliance, and actually, you know, we've got some HR systems and various other things. Those are now all funded centrally. Yes, and my concern as well, our safeguarding. So that's all funded centrally. But actually, in terms of staffing, we've probably been reasonably stable, and we've been able to use the increase in the number of schools, for example, to increase the number of finance staff to provide additional estates staff.
That's really interesting. So you've coped with that growth by ultimately changing the technology landscape that's enabled you to keep the staff in the same. So rather than double the staff to cope with the new schools, you've thought about the systems piece to think, how can we manage the schools better with the resource we've got?
Yeah, I think, you know, that central charge is under pressure, but I think any increase in it would be to pay for things that, you know, we know are clearly identified. So inevitably SEND, professional development, those sorts of things are likely to be the sorts of pressures. Family workers, maybe, those are the sorts of sort of things, educational psychologists, those sorts of things, those are the sorts of things, you know, where schools are really saying, you know, we'd like that resource. So I think if we did look at the central charge, those would be the sorts of things that we'd be looking.
Fine, so you're reviewing spend within the schools, what services are schools buying in across each of them, and actually how can we incorporate that spend and provide specific expertise, and I guess more of. Is that an active process in terms of reviewing those contracts and those services, or is it just kind of evolving over time?
It's evolving over time, really. So we've done quite a lot of the big things. So we have done catering contracts over the years. Although actually, because lots of schools have joined from various points, we actually now have a bit of a hybrid of a number of different catering contracts. But what we've done is we're sure now that we've aligned, we're extending and whatever to align them all so that next time round we can look at them together. We've done cleaning, and again, those are now all aligned across the trust. As I said, we've done multifunction devices, and we've made some quite significant savings.
Have you done anything? We've seen a number of trusts where they've got, say, look at their schools, and the schools are buying into a payroll service, say, at a payslip cost. Centrally, they've procured HR payroll system and kind of built the team, and they've then carried on with the payslip cost to the schools that's been coming into the centre. Has there been any of those where you've kind of bolstered central services, people or technology, and added individual charges for things in addition to the standard top slides? Sorry,
no. So we've only got, at the moment, a central charge. There is a little piece of evolving work around how we support ICT. And it's likely that we probably will move to a model where we share ICT more formally across the trust, and that we have some charging mechanism which is based on number of pupils or devices, or whether you're a secondary or a primary, and those sorts of things. So we are looking at it in the context of that.
Obviously over the last 12 months, IT's come under the spotlight quite a lot, because it's been suddenly a strategic priority. Imagine, did you find that you had different concurrent IT strategies in place in different schools, and this is more about a holistic approach to IT rather than anything else in terms of numbers? It's not a savings piece.
No, it's not a savings piece, and actually I think it's probably going to be the opposite. It's around having very different IT provision across schools and saying actually that's not acceptable. Why should a pupil in one of our schools have an experience that's very different to a pupil in another school? We inherited some third-party contracts, and some of our experiences of managing those third-party contracts have been quite difficult, just because there's different types of infrastructure in place across schools. So it's part of quite a big piece. It's also part of a bigger piece around improving the ICT support in primary schools, which can quite frankly be not very good. So traditionally primary schools have bought into sort of support contracts where they might have seen somebody for half a day a month. And what we're trying to do is to develop a system where we've got kind of geographical patches, and actually, all right, some staff work out of a secondary school, but actually they can go to the primary school down the road and respond when something goes wrong.
And do you see that being more integrated in teaching and learning? I mean, I know nothing about teaching and I won't profess to, but in terms of kind of Google Classroom or Teams or any of those, was it used sporadically in different schools in different ways? Is there a recognition actually there's an opportunity to really use these tools to do something? Let's look at this collectively and understand what that can be.
And we definitely, we had some use of those things, but actually our director of ICT was able to get everybody up and running on Google Classroom almost overnight. So yes, there's a much more, but it's about sort of bringing everything together to be much more cohesive in terms of looking at those systems, or at least, and one of the things that we talk about, and he talks about in particular, is not necessarily saying you can't have something different, but saying that we will have 2 or 3 things that we support, not 14 different things.
Well, thank you so much. We've covered, I know I sent you some broad questions on what we thought we might talk about. I think we started off on the first question, going along those lines, and then it's just evolved. But I think it's been really, really useful to hear what you've been through, what that's been like, and what you guys are doing at Anglian. From our perspective, thank you very much for taking part in this, and I'm sure viewers and people watching this will be grateful for you sharing your time. So thank you very much, Charity.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, we're going to be doing a series of these, so keep an eye out on email and Twitter and LinkedIn and wherever else we are, impsoftware.co.uk, and we're on all of those main channels. Thanks again, and hope to see you at a future one. Thank you very much.